You know what goes well with cute and cuddly creatures of the forest? Why, anarchy, of course. At least that's the mindset of the company Anarchy. This mindset led to the creation of the action strategy game Anarcute. It came out on Steam and the Xbox One on July 12, 2016 for $14.99, with a 10% launch discount on Steam for the first week. I played the game for 5.5 hours and beat it for this review. Can the adorableness of wanted destruction overthrow the Call of Duties of the world to earn a purchase from you? Or does the cute nature of the game hide some nefarious design choices and mislead the player into thinking that it's more than just a pretty face? That's what I'm here to find out, but before I begin, this key was obtained from the developer for the purposes of review. That won't change my opinion of the game in the end, but you should know that because of FTC guidelines, as well as the whole morals thing, you know? Let's start with the most important element of this game, its gameplay. The gameplay is a hybrid of action with a bit of strategy mixed up in there. You start off a level with a couple of your animal companions, and you're given a mission. This mission can vary a tiny bit, but 99% of the time, it's taking over or destroying a particular monument owned by the mysterious unnamed government organization and its brainwashed patrols. You start off with a couple of cute little rioters, and the first thing you do in almost every level is simple: find more partners in chaos. The main mechanic of the game centers around your group. The more you have in numbers, the stronger you are. There's power in these numbers, and Anarcute wants you to get as many people behind your cause as possible. Now, 5 to 10 rioters can still do a little bit of damage, but a group of 50 can absolutely destroy enemies with sheer force. Now, your main abilities are as follows. You can attack anyone close to you with a melee button, which will have your minions surround your foes and give them a nice hug, or punch them in the face, one of the two. You can dodge fast in one direction to avoid attacks, and the dodge is only a short cooldown, meaning you can do it again right away. Once you unlock it, you'll earn meter when attacking, that'll allow you to do a super stomp which can stun enemies, or a super dodge that'll get you out of a dangerous situation. Although the super dodge was something I didn't use, because the default dodge did everything I needed and more. But your other big ability is the ability to throw parts of the environment. Your guys can run around and pick up a bunch of stuff, whether it be umbrellas, chairs, or cars. Apparently these guys are the equivalent of Superman, because they just lift these cars with no problems whatsoever. Now, one thing to note, there are two different controls for throwing. When using the controller, left trigger throws explosive type items, while right trigger throws non-explosive types. I actually like the different buttons here. It gives you a tiny bit more control over your playstyle without it being overly complicated. As you get more rioters, you unlock abilities for your group. You start with a simple stomp that can knock back some enemies and really heavy objects for some reason, as apparently these rioters have the leg strength of Ronaldo. Okay, not bad. But as you gather more and more, you start to get some reasonably strong powers, like the ability to knock over buildings, or specific powers that you can purchase with currency earned after each level. While the game does its best to design levels in a way that you don't necessarily need some of these powers, some of them make things a whole lot easier, so keeping a giant group is preferred. So okay, with the basics of the game described, how is the gameplay? Well, it's okay. Not great, not bad, but just okay. The gameplay is designed to be simplistic, and those who are subscribed to the channel know that I'm a big fan of the KISS principle, aka keep it simple, stupid. However, that principle can only carry a game so far and for a certain length. Anarcute runs into the issue of having some good gameplay mechanics, but they end up being stretched out way too thin over the game's lifespan. Let's go into the details of that, shall we? The strategy element of the game really comes down to the path that you take in a specific level. When the level is more open-ended, for example, you have a multitude of choices to deal with the enemies placed. But remember what I said earlier, numbers in this game are key. The more guys you have, the more power that you've got to use. This turns the game into one simple thing. Find the most optimal path to gather as many guys as you can while facing minimal resistance along the way. The thing is, you don't really have an option otherwise, as despite being skilled with avoiding enemies or throwing objects, most of the time you won't have the firepower in order to deal with these enemies if you don't go that optimal route. And that's the thing. You can lose a lot of people by recklessly charging into a group of enemies, even if you have numbers. You can also lose a bit of people if you're not paying attention to the hazards in the environment. But in the first numbers case, that's rare. And the second one really just requires you to pay attention most of the time. And that's maybe where Anarcute has its biggest issue: difficulty. Luring enemies early on where you have barely anyone in your group is where the strategy portion of the gameplay is at its best, because you have to think about how you approach them and if you can take on a certain group of police. But when you get up to a certain number of rioters, that just doesn't become an issue in most of the cases. You end up facing groups of 10 people when you've got 50. Even if you lose 1 or 5 rioters, it's not an issue. The challenge only presents itself in certain parts of the game where there's big open areas and a lot of people to deal with. Now note, the game does rate and grade you based on how fast and how many people you lost, so there's a score chasing mechanic that incentivizes you to minimize casualties. But just to make it to the next level overall, the game is rather easy, and that would be okay if it was able to keep things fresh throughout the experience. Where Anarcute attempts to keep things fresh is through its level design and its level progression. As you play throughout the game, you'll get new enemies to face, or new items to use within the environments. In terms of these items, they usually have a specific purpose, like the laser, which can destroy certain barriers, or really deal with enemies circling in around you. Enemies come in a couple of varieties as well, such as the ninja, who isn't vulnerable until he attempts to attack you. You just sort of have to wait him out before piling onto him. It provides a change of pace at that point that the game truly needed, as most enemies just needed for you to swarm them smartly. And traps do pop up that will force you to wait out certain elements, and combined with certain enemies, it can make things rather interesting. But the problem is that it doesn't do this often enough. When a stealth section happens, for example, it's great despite not being a stealth fan, as it feels like a breath of fresh air. But this happens way too infrequently. A lot of the time, you're dealing with similar hordes, and despite the changing level design for different configuration of hallways and tighter corridors, you just feel like you're playing the same levels over and over again. At a certain point, it just didn't do enough to keep me interested. And that's when the little problems start becoming a little bit more apparent. The group dynamic does introduce some of these problems into the gameplay. For example, when trying to line up a shot to take down an enemy with a thrown object, you don't know exactly what character of your entourage is going to throw it most of the time, which isn't a problem in wide open areas. But when you get into some of the claustrophobic streets within the game, this does become a big issue, especially with explosive items. You'll curse loudly as you end up throwing a truck against a wall, even though you thought you had the shot lined up nice and reasonably, because the one person that you didn't want to throw it was the one who did. In addition, some of those cramped areas in the game can be a bit annoying when trying not to get your guys killed. You may have sections where you have to get your entire group through a small space, and the window of opportunity to get through certain traps can be really nasty in certain cases with lasers and ground sensors, especially with big groups. Part of the problem here is that you have a center that the game works off of, but that's not always apparent in terms of the visual of the rioters. If you leave the game idle, for example, you notice that the rioters move around, and it can be hard to pinpoint the center point of which rioter is acting as the center of your circle. So when you have 40 people enclosed and you're trying to get accuracy to gather them in a small space, the difference of where you think the center is and where it actually is can lead to some frustration. This could have been taken care of by an identified leader that would always serve as the key center point, but the game doesn't do that, and thus, you end up losing people at what feels like no fault of your own. Here's the thing, if you're looking for complicated mechanics or high-level action gameplay, you're not gonna find it here. While yes, the level design does its best to keep things fresh, it doesn't do it well enough in this game over other action strategy games of the genre. If you're a veteran of this genre, you're gonna get bored very quickly. So add a dehancer for those action veterans out there. But you know who it does work for, however? Kids. There's some difficulty here, as it isn't a walk in the park, but it does a good job of having small learning moments within the gameplay thanks to the level design and the repetition. Those parents trying to teach simple problem-solving concepts with video games will appreciate the start of levels for what it does in teaching moments. And then the kids will get a rush of adrenaline of beating up a bunch of guys at the end of the levels. If you're looking for a nice experience that will keep your kids interested while still being entertaining, then I think Anarcute is exactly the type of game to fill that niche. So add a big enhancer to the score for that one. Let's move on to the PC performance, as I am reviewing this on the PC, but the game is available on the Xbox One as well. Now control-wise, you're gonna want to go with a controller here. The keyboard and mouse controls work, I suppose, but when push comes to shove, it just doesn't compare to the preciseness of the camera controls using a controller's analog stick. It fits a lot more naturally. Considering the game is for the Xbox One as well, the base score is going to assume you're playing with a controller. So I'm going to apply a enhancer if you have to play with a keyboard and mouse, because you do get a lesser experience. PC port-wise, there are hiccups here. I did notice some frame drops in certain sections, but I'm going to be frank here. I'm not sure what is causing them. When trying to isolate the game in terms of the number of items and characters on screen, or whether it was the environment and shading that was causing a problem, I couldn't find a direct cause. You get slowdown sections out of nowhere, like the game was just hitting a wall in terms of processing, and it would cause a 10 to 12 frame per second drop. It tries its best to maintain 60, but it does dip often enough where you notice the drops here and there. So it's not the greatest in terms of performance on the PC. I can't talk about the Xbox One because I didn't review it on the Xbox One. Options-wise, for a small indie game, it is reasonable. You've got bindable keys and controls over things like shadow quality and even the sensitivity of the camera. Resolution options are standard, and you've got basics here like VSync. I've gone through the entire menu on the screen here to show you all the options, so if it's missing one thing you need, take note. Let's move on to the presentation. This is probably why I looked at the game in the first place, because it's very attractive to the eye. The game is made in Unity, and it shows that you can make some really nice games within the engine, despite simple effects not having a strong level of detail. You'll notice things like fire and explosions not really having a lot of detail to them, but honestly, it works within this art environment. What makes it stand out is the smart use of color. When just looking at things, everything is easy to see and identify right away. The different environments hit a gambit of snow-colored landscapes to the sandy beaches of Miami, and they all work rather well in terms of the presentation. It's just visually pleasing, I can't put it better than that. You've got a bunch of different characters that you can unlock in the game, and if you look closely or zoom in closely, you can see a cross between Animal Crossing and chibi anime styles within the designs here, which are nice to look at. The real problem with it, however, is simple. The gameplay itself really needs you to have the camera reasonably far back in order to take advantage of the gameplay, so you don't get the detail on a normal basis, but it's there. Sound-wise, it's sorta meh. I mean, it has sound effects like lasers and characters screaming or chatting to themselves, but when turning it all off, it really didn't have a big impact on gameplay. Not enough was done to indicate problems with sound effects appropriately, and frankly, the sound that is there feels pretty mediocre on the whole in terms of the sound quality. Use of volume would have really taken the game to the next level with a whole herd mentality, but that was missed here. But hey, take a listen and decide for yourself. Music-wise, it's in a strange place to begin with thanks to the themes of the game, with the whole chaos crossed with cuteness thing. And yet, the music somehow sticks with the themes of the levels and the locations that you try to liberate. Well, for the most part. The Russian sounds too tropical for the music it's trying to portray in its level. But places like Miami have a smooth beat that feels inspired by Hotline Miami in some ways. And Tokyo feels like you're in a neon district, moving and grooving while causing wanted destruction. Take a listen. let's finish off with the story. Although to be honest, there's not much to really work off of here. You basically know that there's a government in power and you're fighting it because, well, reasons. You really don't know if they are even truly evil, despite the fact that yes, they took over the Eiffel Tower. But you're the one who blows it up, so honestly, I'm still unsure who the evil one here is. All the storytelling is done through cutscenes between levels, and they do a reasonable job in telling a story through the facial and body language presented by the characters, and do it without saying a word. With that said, there's maybe 10 or less cutscenes in the game from what I count, so you're not getting that much out of it. And in terms of in-game storytelling, there is none really. You don't know why these guys are rioting, you just know that they are. Now some games don't need a story, but I felt like there was enough here that you could have done something with it. You'll have a touching scene or two within the plot, but let me be frank, there's barely any plot in the game, and if you need a story to really enjoy the gameplay, Anarcute isn't going to do it for you. That is a dehancer. In the end, Anarcute is a nice little ride to sit back and relax with, but if you're looking for anything really challenging, it's really not here. Sure, you'll enjoy trying to minimize your losses and trying to get the top award in every run, but it just doesn't have the staying power to keep you that interested. I got bored before things were done, and that's with a standard length for a game at $15. There's not really an interest for me to go and replay it in an arcade sense as well. With all that said, on my scoring scale, Anarcute earns a 67 out of 100, meaning that it's a target sale title in most cases. However, as always, note the enhancers that try to match the game for the audience in question. One audience sticks out strongly in this case, and that's kids. I find this game is that sweet spot of simple gameplay, but good for teaching small elements of problem solving. Games don't have to be simple for kids to enjoy them, of course, but I feel like for the majority of them, they will enjoy Anarcute's gameplay. As always, match it based on what I said earlier in that section of the review in terms of the enhancer and the dehancer. Those who are regulars on the channel are probably wondering why there's been a lack of reviews this week. I'll answer that in tomorrow's Overwatch Friday, but you may know the answer if you follow me on Twitter. It's been a crazy week. But expect an Overwatch Friday, as I just mentioned, and a game design video this weekend, as I really want to dive into a particular boss fight that I had in a certain game that made me want to flip every table this side of the Mississippi. Otherwise, just go cause some anarchy this weekend. Well, okay, don't cause anarchy. Unless if it's needed, you know what, just go play some video games. Thanks for watching. Like the video, share it with a friend, and subscribe if you want more content like this. In the description below, you'll find the Steam review accompanying this vid, along with social media that you can follow me on, Twitter, Google+, and Facebook groups. And if you want to support the channel, click that Patreon on the left of the screen. And remember, keep on gaming.